Good morning. I'm Dr. Michael de Percy, Senior Lecturer in Political Science at the University of Canberra, and I'm here with Professor Michelle Grattan for This Week in Politics. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning.
Michelle, Nationals MP George Christensen has been going solo recently, threatening to cross the floor and rebel against his party on certain pieces of legislation. How much of a complication is Christensen for Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce?
Well, when the government has a majority of one, of course anyone who's likely to act up is potentially a problem. And George Christensen has very strong views on a range of issues. He was very active, for example, on the superannuation issue, which the government has now solved by announcing some compromises. He's also outspoken on morals type issues. But I think that he is likely to stay within the tent rather than doing a Bob Katter, who some years ago left the Nationals, of course, and now has his own party and is in the Parliament on the crossbench. I think George Christensen is quite close to Barnaby Joyce and therefore perhaps is able to be managed by him. But most fundamentally, as he says himself, it's easier to get things when you're within the government than when you're on the crossbench, certainly in the lower house at the moment. So I think he'll stay put, but he's an irritant.
Malcolm Turnbull was in New York recently and he's announced Australia's humanitarian refugee intake would permanently increase to almost 19,000 per year. Is this a sign that the Prime Minister intends to make a shift on immigration issues, including offshore detention?
Well, I think the announcement about the 19,000 being permanent was really a bit of a con, because Tony Abbott had said that the refugee intake would increase to this level in a couple of years, and Malcolm Turnbull's just saying, well, it's going to be permanent. I don't think anyone thought that it wouldn't be permanent, that it would be taken down again. What was interesting in what Malcolm Turnbull said in New York about immigration this week was really the toughness of the line. He repeated a number of times Australia's strong borders policy. He said that was vital for our multiculturalism. He was warning against the whole notion of countries losing control of their borders, and of course this was in the context of United Nations discussion about refugees and the President's summit on refugees. So you saw a lot of continuity, I think, this week between the Turnbull line and the earlier Abbott line and the current Abbott line on tough border policy. As for the people offshore, I think that the government is working on trying to get a third country settlement solution to their position, but we haven't seen anything tangible yet. There are signs, however, there's muttering around the place that something may be in the pipeline.
So also this week, Education Minister Simon Birmingham has foreshadowed changes to the Gonski school funding model, and he's been citing distortions in the system as it stands. Is there a strong case for alterations to be made?
Simon Birmingham's meeting education ministers today in Adelaide, and I think this is going to be a stoush between the federal government and some states, not all states, but the minister earlier this week produced figures showing that similar schools in different states were getting different amounts of federal funding. Now, he says that Labor corrupted the Gonski model through a whole lot of side deals, and certainly I think that there are historical and other factors that have affected funding levels and the way the Gonski model operates. However, the big point is that this government is not going to put the same level of funding into later years of the plan that the Gillard government had envisaged. And so it's an argument over funding, and also, of course, within that argument, there'll be questions of relativities.
And finally, earlier this week, Social Service Minister Christian Porter signalled reform in his portfolio as well. How is the government approaching welfare spending this time around?
What the government is doing is looking to a model that operates in New Zealand, where you have particular groups identified who maybe without intervention will be on welfare for a very long time. Here, very young parents have been identified, carers have been also noted as likely to never get off welfare, young carers that is, and the whole idea is to identify those groups through an actuarial process and then intervene with special help so that they don't have a lifetime on welfare. And Christian Porter is moving to get this system into operation, at present only in a very limited sense, but that's the aim in the longer term. Now, there's been some resistance from the welfare sector to this. They feel suspicious that the government would use this as a cost-saving measure. Christian Porter says, no, it's not about costs, it's about giving people a better life. But, of course, the subtext is, in the end, that you spend relatively less on welfare than you would otherwise. And the Minister this week produced some rather startling figures about how the welfare bill will balloon if nothing is done.
Professor Michelle Grattan, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week in politics, and we look forward to you joining us next week.